This is the last in our sermon series on the life of Mary, the mother of Jesus. When we left Mary last week, she was at the cross. Jesus had told a disciple, described only as the disciple whom he loved, to take care of her. And then Mary watched Jesus die. We read the story today of the women discovering the empty tomb and learning that Jesus was no longer dead. But Mary, the mother of Jesus, was not with them. None of the versions of the story of the empty tomb say that Mary was there. Other Marys were there. There was Mary Magdalene was there. Mary, the mother of James, was there. But Mary, the mother of Jesus, was not. And we're not told how Mary found out that Jesus had risen, but I sure wish we were, don't you? Would you not like to know how that conversation went? I sure would. To see Mary at first not really understanding, and then maybe not believing, and then finally being convinced that Jesus was no longer dead, that he had in fact risen and was alive, that would be an incredible thing to hear. But we don't get that. We do see Mary one more time in the Bible. It's in the first chapter of Acts. Jesus has ascended. He's gone back to heaven for the last time. The disciples all went back to Jerusalem, to the room where they'd been staying. And we're told they all joined together constantly in prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. And that's it. That's the last time we hear about Mary in the Bible. We don't know how long she may have lived after that. We assume that she would have at least seen the start of the work of the apostles. She would have seen Jesus' message start to spread. Maybe she even saw enough to know that what Jesus had started really was going to endure. Maybe she saw enough to really understand, or at least start to understand, what Gabriel had meant when he said that Jesus' kingdom would never end. You know, I like to think of Mary near the end of her life. And by the way, you don't seem to be able to find any pictures that show Mary as an old woman. Nobody paints Mary that way. But I like to think of Mary near the end of her life. She's surrounded by her other children, by her grandchildren. She's reflecting on the life that she's lived. She probably never did understand why God would have chosen her, of all people, to be the mother of the Savior of the world. But at that point, she probably had stopped wondering about it, because after all, why she had been chosen really did not matter anymore. She had been chosen, and she'd done the best that she could. And it was quite a life that she had, you know, when you think about it. She gave birth to the Savior in a barn of all things, surrounded by a bunch of smelly animals. She went on the run with Joseph and Jesus for a few years, escaping the authorities who were out to get him. She brought Jesus to the point where he was ready to go out on his own. Then she let him go. She had to be content with seeing him only once in a while when he happened to come back to Nazareth. She had to stand by and watch when he was arrested and killed, knowing there was nothing she could do about it. And then the joy of hearing that he had been raised from the dead. I would suspect there had to be a lot of times along the way where Mary really did not feel like she knew what she was doing. Don't you think? I mean, I suppose all parents feel that way once in a while, like they really don't know what they're doing. But here she was trying to raise the divine Son of God. How do you do that? How do you discipline him? Do you dare spank the divine Son of God? I mean, I'm not suggesting Jesus was a bad kid or anything, but you know, little kids misbehaving does not make them bad kids. It just makes them little kids. But yet, even when you know they're not bad kids, you still have to discipline them in some way. So how do you do that when you know that this is God's Son, you know? Well, Mary did the best she could. She trusted God to take it from there, and God did. Mary played the role that she had been given. She played it as well as she could. When her role was finished, when she had done what she was supposed to do, she left the stage. The story went on without her. And you know, when you think about it, that's kind of how it works for all of us, isn't it? We go through our lives, and there are a lot of times we don't really know what we're doing, but we do the best we can. We trust God to take it from there. We play the role that we've been given. We play it as well as we can. Sometimes we're given different roles to play at different stages of our lives. But still, we play those roles as well as we can. We trust God to take it from there. When our role is finished, when we've done what we're supposed to do, we leave the stage. And the story goes on without us. That's how it's always been. Think of the history of this church, for example. Think of all the people, both lay people and clergy, who've been so important to the history of this church. Each of them had a role to play. They played it as well as they could. They trusted God to take it from there. Then, for one reason or another, they left the stage. And the story went on without them. And that'll happen to all of us too eventually. Right now, we're all here, and each one of us has a role that we're supposed to play. And each one of us needs to play that role as well as we can. And then we need to trust God to take it from there. Because at some point, I hope it's not for a long time, but at some point, each one of us is going to leave the stage. The story is going to go on without us. And maybe that sounds kind of sad. But I don't really think it is, because in a way I think of it as being very hopeful. Because the history of this church is a good one. There have been some incredible things that have happened because this church is here. They happened because God worked through some really good people to make them happen. And it's important that we recognize that history. It's important that we be proud of that history. But there are incredible things that are happening right now too. And look at these wonderful upgrades that we've made to our audio-visual equipment in just the last month. Well, just the audio equipment just in the last couple of weeks. And really, none of this stuff, the audio-visual equipment, none of it was here a couple of years ago. We've got it upgraded now to where it's as good as any church in the area, including any church in Pierre. And our children's programs have seen incredible growth here just in the last couple of years. And there's so much more to come, but we've had so many wonderful things that are happening right now. We've got a group of loving, caring people who reach out to the community in any way that they can. Incredible things are happening here. They're happening because God is working through some really good people to make them happen. And I am convinced that God is just getting started. I am convinced that God has a lot more incredible things in store for this church. It seems to us like this church has been here for a long time, and maybe in human terms it has been. But remember, we're talking about God here. The Bible tells us that 1,000 years are like a day to God. And this church has been here a lot less than 1,000 years. So I think God is just getting started. This church has had some great days in the past, and it's having some great days now. But I am convinced that its greatest days, this church's greatest days, are still to come. I'm convinced that God is going to work through some wonderful people to make things happen in this church that you and I cannot even imagine right now. Things are going to happen here that you and I cannot even begin to conceive of yet. The story of this church is nowhere near its end. I think it's still near the beginning. Mary played the role that she was given to play. And she did not know why she'd been chosen to play that role. Sometimes she felt like she did not know what she was doing. But God worked through her, and incredible things happened. Mary just saw the beginning of them. She was just part of a larger story. A story that's gone on now for 2,000 years. A story that will go on for a number of years that literally only God knows. And you and I have been given roles to play. We don't know why we've been chosen to play those roles. We sometimes feel like we don't know what we're doing. But God will work through us, through you and me. And incredible things are going to happen. You and I are just going to see the beginning of them because we are part of a larger story. A story that will go on again for a number of years that quite literally only God knows. Someday, our role will be finished. That's true for each one of us. Each of us will have done what we're supposed to do. We'll all leave the stage. And the story will go on without us. But that's okay. In fact, that's better than okay. It's great. Because the story will go on. The story will go on. It went on after Mary left the stage. It will go on after we leave the stage. But it will go on to the great honor and to the great glory of God. Amen.